A revered pastor, a vengeful assistant, and a scandal that shattered an entire congregation. A man celebrated as a beacon of faith and morality, now embroiled in a story of betrayal and disgrace. A woman, burdened by her own pain, who turned her suffering into a calculated act of vengeance. As the story unfolds, one question lingers: who is the real victim? And where does justice cross the line into revenge? New Life Baptist Church stood proudly in the heart of Chicago's South Side, a symbol of resilience, prosperity, and unwavering faith. Its gleaming facade and grand sanctuary welcomed thousands every Sunday. At its helm was Pastor Jerome Mitchell, a man whose charisma and leadership had turned this church into one of the most prominent in the city. Known for his powerful sermons, community outreach, and picture-perfect family life, Pastor Mitchell was revered not just as a spiritual guide but as a symbol of Black excellence. But the walls of New Life Baptist Church hid secrets. Secrets that would unravel its leader's life and send shockwaves through the community. Beneath the polished exterior of Pastor Mitchell's leadership was a darker reality, one that would be exposed not by an outsider, but by someone who worked closest to him. Melissa Jackson, his executive assistant, was a woman whose life had already been marked by heartbreak and struggle. She took the job hoping for a fresh start, a chance to rebuild, but what she found was far from salvation. Melissa quickly became the target of Pastor Mitchell's unwanted advances. Behind closed doors, the man of God revealed a very different side, one that used charm as a weapon, power as a tool of coercion, and his position to exploit. Melissa, already grappling with the burden of her own devastating secret, found herself cornered, unable to leave due to financial and personal constraints. As the pressure mounted, she began to fight back in a way no one could have predicted. What started as desperation transformed into something far more calculated. Melissa documented every inappropriate comment, every coercive act, every moment of harassment. And then, she began to orchestrate a plan that would forever change the lives of everyone involved. But as she moved forward, the lines between justice and revenge blurred. Her actions would lead to a scandal that exposed the underbelly of one of Chicago's most respected churches and forced an entire community to question their beliefs. This is a story of power, manipulation, and retribution. It's a story that will make you question where morality ends and vengeance begins. As we dive into this tale of ambition and consequence, ask yourself, was Melissa justified, or did she cross a line no one should ever cross? Welcome to Vic's Veil of Justice, where we uncover the truths others try to hide. Make sure to subscribe for more stories that delve deep into the complexities of justice, power, and humanity. Pastor Jerome Mitchell was the kind of leader people gravitated toward, charismatic, eloquent, and seemingly driven by an unwavering faith. As the senior pastor of New Life Baptist Church, he transformed it from a modest neighborhood congregation into a sprawling megachurch with state-of-the-art facilities and a membership in the thousands. Every Sunday, the sanctuary was filled with over 3,000 devoted worshipers, eager to hear his sermons. His words inspired hope, his charm united the community, and his leadership extended far beyond the pulpit. Jerome wasn't just a pastor. He was a local celebrity. His face appeared on billboards and charity posters across Chicago's South Side. He hosted community outreach programs, feeding the homeless and offering support to at-risk youth. His efforts earned him interviews on local television, where he spoke about the importance of faith, unity, and resilience in the face of adversity. To many, Pastor Mitchell wasn't just a spiritual guide. He was a symbol of what could be achieved through dedication and belief. His personal life added to the allure. Married to Diane Mitchell, a prominent real estate developer, they were often heralded as the ultimate power couple, a shining example of black excellence. They lived in an elegant home in the prestigious Kenwood neighborhood, attended by staff who helped manage their busy schedules. Jerome's congregation admired him not only for his sermons but for the life he represented, one of success, integrity, and unwavering faith. But as with many figures elevated to near sainthood, the truth about Jerome Mitchell was far from the image he projected. Behind the gleaming walls of New Life Baptist Church, behind the charismatic smile and polished words, lurked a man with deep flaws that would eventually bring his world crashing down. In private, Pastor Mitchell wielded his charm and authority not to uplift, but to control. Over the years, a pattern had emerged, one that the church's leadership quietly ignored. Young women, often vulnerable and in need of guidance, were brought into his orbit under the guise of mentorship or employment. Melissa Jackson, his latest hire, fit this pattern all too well. Melissa, at 32, was bright and ambitious, but she carried a heavy burden, a secret that made her vulnerable. She had joined the church as Pastor Mitchell's executive assistant, hoping to find stability and a sense of purpose. Instead, she became the target of his unwanted attention. It started with subtle remarks, compliments that seemed harmless at first. "That dress suits you, Sister Jackson," or "You've got such striking eyes." But the remarks soon escalated. Accidental touches, lingering stares, and invitations to late-night meetings under the pretext of work blurred the boundaries of their professional relationship. For Melissa, these interactions were deeply unsettling. She tried to brush them off, to maintain professionalism. But Pastor Mitchell had no intention of stopping. His charm, so effective in the public eye, took on a sinister edge in private. He used his position of power to manipulate, to isolate, and to coerce. His words often carried a dual meaning, cloaked in spirituality but laden with ulterior motives. "God brought you here for a reason," he told her one evening, his tone suggestive. For Melissa, the weight of his advances became unbearable. But Melissa was not like his past victims. While others had been silenced, forced to leave quietly or endure the abuse in silence, Melissa decided to fight back. At first, it was out of desperation, an attempt to protect herself and her job. But as the months went on, desperation turned into determination. She began documenting everything: the texts, the late-night meetings, the veiled threats. It was clear to her that Jerome Mitchell wasn't just a flawed man, he was a predator. For years, Pastor Mitchell had maintained the perfect illusion, a man of God adored by thousands, a pillar of the community. But Melissa's story would tear that illusion apart, piece by piece. The charismatic leader who seemed untouchable would soon be exposed, not just for his private misdeeds but for the devastating impact they had on those around him. This is the story of power, betrayal, and the thin line between justice and revenge. As the pieces begin to fall, one must ask, how does a man who preaches righteousness justify his own corruption? And how does a woman, pushed to the brink, decide to take justice into her own hands? Keep watching, and don't forget to subscribe to Vic's Veil of Justice, where we uncover the truths others try to hide. Melissa Jackson's story is one of hope crushed by betrayal and resilience turned into a quest for justice. Born and raised on Chicago's South Side, Melissa was no stranger to hardship. Her early 20s were spent juggling part-time jobs to put herself through community college, always striving for a better future. But life had dealt her cruel blows. At 27, she received the devastating news that she was HIV positive, the result of a relationship with a man who had concealed his status. The diagnosis changed her world forever, filling her with a mix of shame, anger, and a determination to move forward, no matter the odds. By January 2021, Melissa was facing a new set of challenges. Her mother, her only surviving family, had been diagnosed with cancer, and the medical bills were mounting. Melissa herself struggled to afford the medications she needed to manage her condition. When the opportunity to work as an executive assistant at New Life Baptist Church came along, it felt like a lifeline. The church's reputation, its generous salary, and the promise of stability all seemed like answers to her prayers. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to feel a glimmer of optimism. But that optimism didn't last. Within weeks of starting the job, Melissa began to notice unsettling behavior from Pastor Jerome Mitchell. At first, it was subtle. Compliments on her appearance, comments on her clothing. "That dress looks nice on you," he would say, his tone disarmingly casual. "You should wear your hair down more often." She dismissed these remarks as harmless, chalking them up to his charismatic personality. But soon, the interactions took a darker turn. Pastor Mitchell began finding reasons to keep Melissa in his office late at night, often under the guise of urgent tasks. "Sister Jackson, I need help preparing Sunday's sermon," he would say. "These counseling files need organizing, and no one else can do it like you." The praise felt like a trap, and Melissa found herself cornered. One evening, as she prepared to leave his office, Pastor Mitchell stepped closer, his voice low. "I think we both feel this connection," he said. "God brought you here for a reason." Melissa's stomach churned. She backed away, stammering a refusal, but his response chilled her to the core. "Think carefully about your next move," he said, his voice soft but menacing. "A lot of people would love this position. It would be a shame if your performance reviews started suffering." Overwhelmed, Melissa tried to protect herself. She requested a transfer to the church's administrative office. Denied. She asked to adjust her hours to avoid late-night meetings. Denied. Every avenue she tried was blocked, leaving her trapped. That's when she made a decision that would change everything. If she couldn't escape, she would fight back. Quietly, methodically, she began documenting every inappropriate interaction. Text messages, recordings of their conversations, even the times he brushed against her arm or stood too close, all of it became evidence. Her journal became her confidant, a place where she poured out her fears and her growing resolve. "Day 1 of the plan," she wrote, her handwriting shaky. "Evidence secured. I will make him feel what I felt." It wasn't just about self-defense anymore. It was about justice, or perhaps something darker. Melissa's plan unfolded in stages, each step more deliberate than the last. First, she agreed to return to work after briefly resigning, knowing it would raise suspicion if she didn't. "If I stay close," she told herself, "I can gather more proof." She started saving screenshots of text messages where Pastor Mitchell's intentions were unmistakable. One read, "God has blessed me with discernment about you. This is His plan for us." Another said, "No one will disturb us at this hour." She began recording their conversations using a discreet app on her phone, capturing his words and her own responses. When he said, "Melissa, you're special. I see something in you no one else does," she responded with, "Thank you, Pastor. I hope I can live up to your expectations," her voice carefully neutral, hiding her disgust. But it wasn't enough to document his harassment. Melissa wanted to expose him for what he was, a man who used his power to manipulate and destroy. When Pastor Mitchell invited her to a private dinner, she agreed, knowing it would provide further evidence. She wore the red dress he'd once complimented, her heart pounding as she tucked a voice recorder into her purse. Over wine, he laid out his rules. No communication through church channels, no being seen together near the church, and under no circumstances was his wife to find out. "I have a reputation to protect," he said. Melissa nodded, feigning submission. Inside, she seethed. The affair began that night in a boutique hotel Melissa had researched carefully. She ensured there were receipts, timestamps, and recordings to prove every detail. Each interaction was another piece of the puzzle, another step toward her goal. "He never asked about protection," she wrote in her journal. "Never asked about my sexual health. Just took what he wanted, like he always does." As weeks turned into months, Melissa's resolve hardened. She watched Pastor Mitchell with a clinical detachment, noting every symptom of his health decline. "July 12th, she wrote. "He's showing the first signs: fatigue, night sweats, low-grade fever. He thinks it's the flu." She documented his complaints, his excuses, his refusal to see a doctor. Every detail became part of her growing arsenal of evidence. But beneath her calculated actions was a woman in turmoil. Melissa wrestled with guilt and doubt, questioning whether her plan was justified. "Am I any better than him?" she asked herself late at night. "Or am I becoming the monster I hate?" Yet every time she considered stopping, she remembered his threats, his entitlement, the way he had cornered her and so many others. Melissa Jackson's journey from victim to avenger was one of survival, retaliation, and a deep, burning need for justice. But as her plan unfolded, she began to realize that the line between right and wrong, justice and revenge, was far thinner than she had ever imagined. To Melissa, each encounter was a step deeper into a labyrinth of her own making. She felt her identity slipping away as she played the role of the reluctant, corrupted church girl. But her journal reflected the reality of her internal conflict. "I hate him," she wrote. "I hate myself for letting this go on. But if I stop now, everything I've endured will mean nothing." As the weeks turned into months, Melissa noticed the first signs of Pastor Mitchell's health decline. He began complaining of fatigue, brushing it off as the pressures of running the church. Then came the night sweats, drenching the sheets in the hotel room. He dismissed them as a reaction to Chicago's humid summer nights. Melissa watched silently, documenting every symptom with the precision of someone who knew exactly what they meant. "July 12th, she wrote in her journal. "He blames the flu. The virus is taking hold." His arrogance, once an impenetrable shield, began to crack. Pastor Mitchell started experiencing low-grade fevers and unexplained weight loss, which he celebrated as a result of dieting. Melissa played her role flawlessly, feigning concern while secretly noting every detail. "He's too proud to see a doctor," she wrote. "Just like I was too ashamed when it happened to me." The tension grew with each passing day. Pastor Mitchell's sermons, once electrifying, began to falter. He stumbled over words, paused more frequently to catch his breath, and leaned heavily on the pulpit for support. The congregation whispered, attributing his decline to overwork or stress. But Melissa knew better. She could see the truth unfolding before her eyes, even as she questioned her own motivations. Late at night, she would lie awake, replaying the events in her mind. Her plan was working, But at what cost? The guilt gnawed at her, even as she reminded herself of his threats, his manipulation, and his abuse of power. Am I becoming him? She asked herself in one particularly dark journal entry. Or am I just delivering the justice no one else will? As Pastor Mitchell's health deteriorated, his reliance on Melissa grew. He confided in her more, trusted her implicitly, and even began to see her as a source of comfort. The irony wasn't lost on Melissa. The man who had manipulated so many now found himself vulnerable, dependent on the very person he had sought to control. She noted it all, every cough, every wince, every moment of weakness. September 28th, she wrote. He's deteriorating faster than I expected. I should feel triumphant, but all I feel is emptiness. Melissa's dual role, as both the cause and the witness of Pastor Mitchell's decline, took a toll on her spirit. She had set out to expose him, to make him understand the pain he had inflicted on others. But as his symptoms worsened and his confidence crumbled, she found herself wrestling with a haunting realization. Revenge, no matter how justified it seemed, came with its own kind of poison. Her plan was nearing its crescendo, but the cost of seeing it through was becoming more than she had ever anticipated. Detective Marcus Williams knew from the start that this case would be anything but straightforward. The accusations against Melissa Jackson, intentionally transmitting HIV to her employer, Pastor Jerome Mitchell, were both serious and deeply personal. Under Illinois law, criminal transmission of HIV is a Class II felony, carrying a penalty of 3 to 7 years in prison and fines up to $25,000. But intent was everything, and proving it would require unearthing the complex relationship between these two individuals and their tangled motives. Williams began by piecing together the timeline. Diane Mitchell's complaint, which accused her husband of contracting HIV through extramarital affairs, had initially been vague. But her private investigators had uncovered a trove of evidence, including surveillance photos, hotel receipts, and financial records. Melissa Jackson's name appeared repeatedly, and when Diane discovered Melissa's known HIV-positive status, she pointed directly to her as the source. For Diane, it was clear, Melissa had acted out of revenge. Melissa, however, told a different story when questioned. She admitted to her relationship with Pastor Mitchell but denied any intent to harm him. "He pursued me relentlessly," she said during her initial interview. "I resisted, but he wouldn't stop. I didn't set out to hurt him. I just wanted him to leave me alone." Her lawyer, Vernon Walsh, advised her to remain tight-lipped as the investigation intensified. The real breakthrough came when Melissa's cousin, Rachel, stepped forward. Guilt-ridden, Rachel provided testimony that changed the course of the investigation. "She told me what she was doing," Rachel confessed to Detective Williams. "Melissa said she wanted him to feel what she felt. She called it justice." Rachel's statement, combined with Melissa's journals, which meticulously documented her interactions with Pastor Mitchell, formed the backbone of the prosecution's case. Melissa's journals painted a damning picture. In one entry, dated April 15th, she wrote, "He thinks he can throw me away like trash, but I'll show him. He'll know what it feels like to lose everything." Another, dated July 12th, detailed her observations of his health decline. "He blames the flu, but I know better. The virus is taking hold." These entries, along with voice recordings and saved text messages, suggested a calculated plan to harm Pastor Mitchell. The leaks to the media turned the case into a public spectacle. Headlines across Chicago read, "Church Scandal, Pastor versus Secretary, and revenge or justice. The Melissa Jackson case. Opinions were sharply divided. Some saw Melissa as a victim, pushed to the brink by a manipulative predator. Others condemned her as a criminal who had weaponized her HIV status to exact revenge. When the case went to trial, Assistant District Attorney Sarah Rodriguez made a compelling opening statement. "This case is about intentional harm," she argued. Melissa Jackson knowingly engaged in intimate contact with Pastor Mitchell, withholding critical information about her status and documenting his suffering in real time. This was not an accident. It was a calculated act of revenge. The prosecution presented Melissa's journals as evidence of her intent, reading aloud the most incriminating passages. They also relied heavily on Rachel's testimony, which established Melissa's mindset leading up to the affair. "She was angry, hurt, and determined to make him pay," Rachel said on the stand. But the defense, led by Walsh, painted a different picture. "Melissa Jackson is not the villain here," Walsh argued. "She is a victim of harassment, coercion, and manipulation by a man who abused his power for years. Her actions, while misguided, were born out of desperation and fear, not malice." Walsh introduced testimonies from other women who had worked with Pastor Mitchell, each detailing a similar pattern of behavior. Kimberly Peters testified, "He used his position to exploit me, just like he did with Melissa. He said it was God's will, and if I refused, I'd lose everything." Angela Wilson shared a similar story, describing how Pastor Mitchell had threatened to ruin her reputation when she tried to leave. As the trial unfolded, it became clear that Pastor Mitchell was not an innocent party. The defense highlighted his predatory behavior and the systemic failures within New Life Baptist Church that allowed it to continue unchecked. They also argued that Melissa had no intention of transmitting the virus, emphasizing the lack of medical evidence proving direct transmission. The turning point came when an infectious disease specialist testified that Pastor Mitchell's symptoms could not definitively be traced back to Melissa. Given his multiple partners and the timeline of infection, it's impossible to determine who infected whom, the expert said. This testimony cast doubt on the prosecution's argument of intentional transmission. The jury deliberated for 3 days before reaching a verdict. Melissa Jackson was found guilty of reckless conduct, a lesser charge that acknowledged her poor judgment without labeling her actions as a deliberate attempt to harm. The judge sentenced her to 2 years of probation, community service, and mandatory counseling. While the sentence was far lighter than what the prosecution had sought, it still left a mark on Melissa's life. In his closing remarks, the judge addressed both the courtroom and the broader public. This case highlights the complexities of power, abuse, and revenge. While Ms. Jackson's actions showed poor judgment, they were born out of a toxic dynamic that should never have existed in the first place. This is not just a cautionary tale about personal responsibility, but also about the dangers of unchecked power in our institutions. The trial's conclusion left the community divided. For some, Melissa's sentence was too lenient. For others, it was a step toward acknowledging the systemic issues that had allowed Pastor Mitchell's behavior to go unchallenged for so long. Pastor Mitchell, disgraced and in poor health, resigned from his position and moved out of Chicago. Melissa, meanwhile, left the city to start anew, her story serving as both a warning and a testament to the thin line between justice and revenge. So, what do you think? Was the verdict fair, or did justice miss its mark? Was Melissa a victim fighting back, or did she cross a line no one should ever cross? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We want to hear from you. And if you're drawn to unraveling complex cases like this, Subscribe to Vic's Veil of Justice for more gripping stories of power, justice, and the thin line in between. Until next time, stay curious and stay just. When power corrupts, victims often strike back, but the line between justice and revenge remains perilously thin. What happened here wasn't just a scandal. It was a tragedy for everyone involved. Thank you for watching Vic's Veil of Justice. If you're intrigued by stories that challenge your perception of right and wrong, be sure to subscribe. And remember, justice is complex, and the truth is rarely as simple as it seems. Until next time, stay vigilant and stay just.